Hello, this is David McKay with McKay Photography Academy as well as Photo Enthusiast Network, and I am bringing you a video just to help you get ready for maybe you're coming to a class of ours, or maybe you're going out on a photography tour. Maybe you just possibly came across this video and you're just trying to figure out getting around your Nikon camera. This video is going to focus on how to change the shutter speed, the aperture, which is also called an f-stop, and the ISO. Now, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to look down at the top of your camera. Now, various Nikon cameras have their what's called mode dial in various locations. It could be over here, it could be somewhere else on the camera, or it could look like this. In order for your dials to work that we're going to be talking about, in order to change the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, I want you to change this to M for manual. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and change that dial over. If your camera looks something like this, it simply means that you're going to press this button here for mode, and your digital readout over here will go through the various options such as manual or the priority modes. So get that on the M as well, and let's go ahead and take you through what will work to change these settings in your camera. Depending on the Nikon you have, we're going to go ahead and hit a couple different options. Next step here is I want you to take a look at your Nikon camera. So your cameras come with either a 2-dial system or a 1-dial system. This is super important because if your camera has 2 dials, which would be one on the back for your thumb. Now, all of the Nikon cameras will have this dial, but your camera may or may not have a dial right at the front top of the right hand grip. Now, it's very simple. If your camera does have both dials, it's very, very simple. Your back dial, as you rotate that, is going to change what is known as the shutter speed right here. You will see this readout either here, you'll see it through the viewfinder. Depending on your Nikon camera, you may also have an LED up here with the mode dial over here that you would see it changing on here. It all depends on the level of camera you have, but that dial is going to change the shutter speed. Now, if your camera does have a front dial on it, that is how you're going to change the aperture and the f-stop. Okay, so this dial is going to change the shutter speed. That front dial is going to change what is known as your aperture and f-stop. So go ahead and give that a try. Now, as an example, let's just say that you have a 1-dial system. You don't have a dial in the front. Your back dial is still going to control the shutter speed. All right, so no matter what camera you have, that is going to control the shutter speed. Now, if you don't have that front dial up here, so you have your back dial, but you don't have that front dial as I showed you, how do you change your aperture? So this is only for people that have the 1-dial Nikon. That might be something like the D3000 series, like the 3200, 3400, that kind of thing, 7200, etc., etc. This would not be for the newer Nikon Z cameras, as an example, or any of the, like the Nikon D800, 850. Those will all be 2-dial systems. But if you do not have a dial up here and only this dial, that's going to change your shutter speed. In order to change the aperture, first thing is this happens to be on automatic. We want that to be on manual, M for manual. You're going to hold this button down. As you simultaneously hold that button down and turn the back dial, you will notice that your f-stop or your aperture will also now change. Now, it's very important as you learn in photography that this button has dual functionality. So if you're in something called the priority mode, it's going to act as something else called compensation. Now, that comes as you learn. For right now in this video, it is simply being able to change your shutter speed and change your aperture, or also known as an f-stop. So again, 2 dials, back dial and a front dial, would allow you to go ahead and change your aperture here and your shutter speed with the back dial. And again, if you have just 1 dial on the back there, you would go ahead and depress this button, hold it down, and use that, and that is going to change your aperture setting. Again, aperture also known as an f-stop, and you have to make sure that you are on the M for manual settings in order for those to work. On the back of your LED, or excuse me, your LCD, you will see readouts like this. Now, various Nikons read them out a little bit differently, but they are the same exact thing. So as an example, this LCD shows it this way. This is your shutter speed. This one at 200th of a second. The aperture is at f6.3, and then the ISO was set at 100. Okay, so you'll see that. You might see some things down here to where we can change some of the items like the ISO. Now you'll notice this LCD, it's the exact same information, but it just shows up a little bit differently here. Please look through your camera viewfinder and notice at the bottom of the viewfinder screen, when you look through it, you'll see all of these same settings in a digital readout at the bottom of your camera. It's important to get used to photographing that way so you can make changes very quickly without having to look at the back of your camera. Of course, you'll be learning all of this out in the field with us if you're on one of our tours or in one of our classes. After you've learned how to change the shutter speed and the aperture, now it's important to know how to change what's known as your ISO. Now this can be a little bit tricky because all of the cameras have them possibly in different locations depending on the Nikon that you have. For most of the amateur Nikon cameras, you're going to notice a big button on the back that says just I, and it's basically, you might see an I or an info, but if you depress that I, like you'll notice up here, it's in the top right of this camera, where here, it's in the bottom left of that camera. When you depress that, a screen is going to come up that's going to look something like this right here. And you'll notice over here, there are different things that you can scroll through. This is to help so that you don't have to go into the full menu system to get to these settings. This is a quick way to get in. And when you click that I button, you can simply scroll through using your dial, scroll through to where the ISO is, and you can change your ISO. And that's how you can do that manually. Now you'll notice on the back of your screen or through the viewfinder, when you see the other settings, such as your shutter and aperture, like we just looked at, you'll also see your ISO as well. Now, some of the screens look like this. Again, some of them look like this. In this case, if you hit that info button, right, you would go ahead and you would be able to scroll over here and change your ISO right here. So look for that. So go ahead and look for the big info button and go ahead and scroll over and scroll down to the ISO, and then use your dial to change that to the different ISO settings so you get used to that. Now, some of the other Nikon cameras will have a button maybe here, or like in this case, there's one right here for ISO. In that case, you simply hit that ISO button, and then you can scroll through using your back dial the various ISO settings. All right, so it's important. Shutter, aperture, ISO. Those are the three settings that you need to be able to change. All of the cameras, the back dial is going to change that shutter speed. If you only have a single dial camera, remember that we are only going to use the back dial, depressing that front button right here and holding that down, and that is how you will change your aperture. Of course, if you have two dials, it's very, very simple. You're going to go ahead and use your back dial to change the shutter speed, your front dial to change the aperture. To get to the ISO sensitivity settings, you can click the big I button and scroll through these right here, and you'll be able to come to your ISO, as well as other functions here, but you'll be able to come to your ISO and change it right there. Now, if your camera has an ISO button on it, you can go ahead and hit that button and hold it down and use your dial to change through the ISO settings there. So those are the three functions that you need to be able to get started in manual photography. Hope this is helpful, and we will see you out in a class or on the field.